is on the topic of community engagement, and these are people who bring a lot of experience in this area and often multiple perspectives, having worn different hats over the years. I'm going to ask one question, and I'll ask each of our panelists to give us a little bit of a story about this if they have one. Ask them to think about a time when they realized the importance of community engagement. Darcy, you first one to nod, so I'm going to let you start.
Throughout my involvement with stakeholder engagement, there's been a number of aha moments. I'm going to keep to something that was very, very simple that I was able to observe a number of years ago. And it really accomplished two important goals that I think is shared by industry and the regulator and the landowners. And that is unencumbered access to land and unfettered access to land and community acceptance. So if you have those two key components, I think you have been able to demonstrate some successful stakeholder engagement. And what it was is very simple. It was just watching two different companies. They were both pretty much about the same size, the same type of development, both developing side by side, and operator A, or company A, continually had, in those days, what we called objections. They're now statements of concern. But they had a number of objections that they were continually fighting. They had a number of delays with the community that they were continually fighting. And they always had to have just about all of their applications submitted in a non-routine fashion. And then you had company B, who was, like you say, right across the street in the same community. Sometimes their competing wells were directly across the road from each other, and they had no problems. I mean, any of their well applications, their pipeline applications, facility applications, they went in without any unencumbered problems with approval. So having a look at it and really trying to observe what some of the differences were, is company A really did the absolute minimum that they had to do with respect to any notification or any engagement at all. And they just let all of the minimum requirements be their maximum requirements for their development. And then looking at company B, they were actually a lot more proactive in actually getting out and meeting with the landowners, meeting with the community, and doing that personal engagement effort. So I also had a chance to speak to a lot of the objectors and ask them why, when there was identical drilling methods, completion methods, construction methods. And they said it boiled down to the fact that they felt that company A just had a bad attitude, that they, over a very short period of time, had developed a terrible reputation. And if, as a corporation, you don't have a good reputation and good relationships, you're not going to try and achieve those two goals of access to land and community acceptance. So, and I asked them, well, what about company B? And they said they actually took the time to develop those relationships and establish some trust and rapport with the community. They didn't know who company A was, what they stood for, what they were about, but they knew the operators' names that drove in and out of the leases with company B. And I think that boiled down to just a very basic premise of, very simple stakeholder engagement at the front end on a proactive level can do you a world of good throughout the development.
Thanks, Darcy. Maybe you can pass the mic down to Michelle. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So this is last minute. I have no notes other than the questions, but that's all right. In regards to a defining moment for, I'm just going to say my relation to or the community that I moved into. We had about, it's going to be 6 years ago now, a gravel company that came in and wanted to do a development right across from where I'm at. And that was fine. I am pro-development and everything else, but as a community, we all pulled together. We were within a 5-mile radius where we pulled the whole community together because we were right on a highway and we were concerned about safety and everything else. And believe it or not, was a defining moment for me in the synergy that the community pulled together. I'm new to the community. I have just know my immediate neighbors, but we pulled together all our strengths. We went together to an open house. We got involved with everybody's specialty. We had an engineer who was looking at the the as-is builts and things like that, and it really impacted me to say, you know what, collectively we can work together. And it did. We did bring about changes to their development plan. They cooperated with saying, okay, we're not going to do our operations 7 days a week, 24/7. We're actually going to go Monday to Friday, 7 to 7, no weekends. And it really melded the community together for me. So synergy works, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's sand and gravel, in that respect. So that would be my experience.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a defining moment because I think it's been a journey for me, but there are a couple of stories I'd share with you. One was in the process of using the proactive engagement process that SPOG has in the Caroline area. We had been meeting with a group of people that were dedicated to helping us understand how to go about the final stages of the development of the Caroline field. And if you know a little bit of history of the Caroline field, it was a fairly contentious development and it's very high sour gas, and there was a lot of issues over the years, but a lot of good people like Alice Murray and others have worked very hard at working with the community. And for me, I think one of the most defining moments was I was at a meeting with this group of people, and we had finished up, and one of the ladies stood up, and you must understand that this particular person had been a very strong opposer of the development and had some serious concerns about health issues, et cetera, et cetera. And she stood up in that meeting and she said, we really appreciate Shell's approach, your transparency, and we as a community have built a trust in you that when you have problems, we feel sorry for you. Now, for a person like myself in the industry, to have the community say, we feel sorry for you, was a very defining moment, and the power of community engagement for me. I have to say I had a little tear in my eye for sure that day, and it really spoke to me about the importance of us getting out and engaging with the community effectively.
I have a story that again touched me very personally. And I've suggested that this story be shared at Synergy Alberta at some time, but to keep it very short, I would, because there are a number of defining moments in that whole story. But I'll just say that the defining moment came when I was in a fairly remote area, west central Alberta, climbed out of a helicopter to meet some First Nation elders, because it was discovered through some very good synergistic work of another company. In working with that First Nation community, it was discovered a multiple grave site area that was very old, that the elders knew about the story of why all these graves were in this location, but over time had lost the exact location. And during this good work by this other company, this grave site was found. The reason I was there on behalf of the company I was representing was because we got a call from this company that we had worked with synergistically to say, and this grave site is right adjacent to a pipeline that your company constructed 20-some years previous. Fortunately, we had also built a relationship with that First Nation community and those elders. And after consulting with them, looking at survey plans, walking the site, flying the site, realized that a portion of the construction had actually cut through, unbeknownst at the time, through a portion of that grave site. If you'd walked into that grave site area without knowing, you have no idea without the traditional knowledge. And so I walked out of that helicopter over to the gathering of the elders there, and I said, yes, we can confirm that it was our company that cut through the gravesite. And I thought of my own family's cemetery plot back in Saskatchewan and wondered how I would take that news if an oil and gas company had cut through our family plot. And one of the elders looked at me and said, how could you have known? When you built this pipeline, we didn't have a relationship. And now we do. And we're very thankful that because of that relationship, we together have found our ancestors and are together able to honor them. And we did.
I feel like I need a moment of silence after that. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate sharing that. And thanks to each of the panelists for sharing those moments. It becomes clear when you listen to people talk about their experiences how personal it becomes in some ways, that it's about people talking to people, and it's about each of you as with the roles that you've had and the roles that you take on in your communities. You're a person working with other people, whether those other people are in the community and the companies or in other capacities. So it's about people being with people. And I think in the synergy context, we understand that, but we also know that there's more pressure these days and perhaps more expectations to do other things in addition to having people talk to people. We know about the impact of social media and other online and then electronic tools. So I wonder if maybe just a couple of you would like to comment about how do you make choices in terms of the engagement work that you do. You can't do it all. You can't always be there in person. You can't always be at every event or be at every in-person opportunity. How do you make choices about whether you go somewhere in person or whether you use some other electronic means or engage through social media?
I think that at the beginning of a relationship, you've got to do face-to-face. And once that relationship begins to become established, I think you ask, what is your preference for future talks and discussion, and keep on top of that as the relationship grows and develops and as things change in your operation and in the community.
I have to agree totally with you, Eric. I think we have to start face-to-face. Research shows that only 7% of what we communicate is what we say. The other 93% is how we show up and our facial expressions, the tone in our voice, etc. I don't know how social media hasn't got that smart, or email, etc. And so those initial relationship building meetings, those face-to-face meetings are very, very important to help us build the trust that we need to better understand and listen to the community first before we begin to break out into other sorts of communication strategies. And I personally, the most effective use of social media or use of the technology came as a result of building some trust with the community and having them, as you say, Eric, come to us with an idea as to how we could use technology to inform them in a more effective and complete way. So again, for me, it's allowing the community to drive how we can communicate so that we're actually connecting.
Darcy, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I think you need to ask yourself a number of questions too. It's not only it is difficult to try and figure out which avenue or which method of communication you want to use. I think you have to identify who your audience is, what kind of message you want to deliver, where they are. Like, are they a local audience that you want to reach? Is it a regional? Is it international? I think you have to ask yourself, why do you need to engage? Like, on what level are you trying to communicate with? Before you can choose whether you want to just inform, or whether you want to provide or have feedback, or whether you just want to do a quick notification to share some information. I think it's not only just as important to ask people on how they want to be engaged and what kind of communication they would like to receive. I think you got to be clear on some of the intent of the who, what, where, when, and whys of what you're trying to get across. Nobody likes to waste their time, discussing or hearing information if it isn't relevant and if it isn't meaningful to them.
Okay, great, thank you. So, looking ahead, I guess the pressure and the opportunities for different forms of communication and engagement are there. I wonder, Michelle, if you could comment on kind of from the community perspective, what is it that you see is changing? How are expectations for being engaged changing in your community?
Well, I guess I can only relate to my kids, right? And that's the thing. Everything wants instantaneous, and they want the facts now. And everything is quick, and maybe not a whole lot of thought but behind it. They're not interested in emotion. They just want give me the facts. I'll see how it correlates to me, and let's move on. So I think for example, I want to say that the technology is advancing, and in our small communities, especially our rural communities, we need to keep up with some of that. I know, like broadband internet, the fiber, that's been an issue. People can't get reliable internet out in the country. So if we had a connection where, boom, we knew we had that reliable, the communication would be, and the engagement may be a little bit stronger. And in that regard.
Eric, I wondered if you want to comment on that in terms of what the role might be for synergy groups in that communication role or in that fact-sharing role. And I'll add to that to say, and is there a role for synergy groups in terms of connecting with other groups in the community?
Definitely. I think, I think synergy groups, it would behoove us to ask the question, who is not at the table? To continually ask that question. That's not necessarily easy to answer, but who isn't at the table? And why is that, perhaps? And then ask those people, why is that? Great example right here in the room is with the Clearwater Trails Initiative. A synergy group, West Central, began a process of understanding this relationship, this interaction that happened on the land between oil and gas infrastructure and recreational use, and some of the negative impacts that were happening both ways. So oil and gas figured, hey, we need to do something about this, and in some ways thought, hey, we're blazing some new ground here. So we started to ask around and open ourselves up to what else has happened. We've discovered that the timber industry had 10 years and 20 years previously done a ton of work on this, and had gone so far, and yet 10 years previously had to come to an end of all of their planning, all of their work, their mapping, their surveying of how to deal with the interaction between recreation and industry on the land, because oil and gas and timber industry really wouldn't sit down together and talk. And so we said, well, I think we need to do that. And it had never been done before in our area to that extent. And out of that came as more and more people, until a whole new synergy group was formed and now is doing, I think, groundbreaking work in our province. Because they asked the question and they're willing to listen, to say, we don't have all the answers.
Okay, great, thank you. Glen, I'm going to pose a question for you. Maybe Darcy will want to comment on it too. And after that, I am going to turn it over to the audience. If you've got questions, please feel free to get those ready. Glen and Darcy, we're all well aware of the economic situation that our province is in at the moment. Lots of pressures on companies these days to cut costs where they can. We have friends and colleagues who aren't at the Synergy Conference this year because of those pressures. Some no longer with the companies, some unable to be here because of the pressures around it. So, what advice do you have for companies in this time? What does it mean for community engagement in terms of how companies respond, I guess, to this to this situation?
Well, there's no doubt the industry is getting smaller and having to do things with fewer people, and that is going to put a lot of pressure on organizations to resource community engagement. But I guess if I was to give some advice to the industry from my own experience, and I can do that, I suppose, because I'm outside of it now, I would say that there's a remarkable opportunity at this stage in the history of the oil and gas business for them to engage the community, to come up with some innovative and creative ways on how to do this. The issue and the complexity of the issues with respect to how industry is going to relate and I guess connect with the communities that they work in is not going to go away. In fact, I think it'll only get more complicated. I think that the complexity is not only between oil and gas and communities, but I think there's also going to be other land use issues as we continue to use more and more of the land space, and those conflicts are not going to resolve themselves. There's going to need to be work done to do that. And I think, you know, I'm speaking to the converted, because that's why you're here, is we all agree that the right way to do that is in a collaborative way, because when we do it that way, we allow ourselves to be open to a very broad range of perspectives on issues, and that opens up a tremendous opportunity for innovative ways. So getting back to the oil and gas business, this isn't the time to not be engaging with our communities or to cut back on resourcing the work that needs to be done, but it will have to be done differently. And I think we have a tremendous resource with synergy groups, with community groups that can help the industry understand how to do that in a more efficient and more effective way than we have today. We've come a long ways in the last several decades in how we engage with one another, and we certainly don't want to lose that momentum.
Thanks, Glenn. Darcy?
Well, my grandfather always said, "Boy, you look a lot smarter when you're not talking." But I think that's counterintuitive. I think it's a given that the successful companies are going to be the ones that can master the art of communication, meaningful communication, and meaningful stakeholder engagement. And if you truly want to embrace a successful outcome in being that neighbor of choice or being that operator of choice, the business drivers will follow. It's not a matter at times where I think you're going to have to decide whether you do it or you don't. I think that it's going to be an expectation as part of the community, as part of government, as part of the regulator, as part of your peers, that stakeholder engagement is essential and crucial to any development and anything ongoing. I've always believed that you can tell somebody to go to hell with a smile on your face, and that it's all in the approach. And if you truly want to be that operator of choice, it's just as important to get to know the person as it is to get to know their position. And embrace ongoing stakeholder engagement, and don't just be that entity that comes knocking on the door when you want something, or when you want to beg forgiveness for screwing up, or when you want to deliver some bad news, right? Whether it's a spill or a release or something like that. I think even with the downturn in the economy, I think it's just as important to continue on with that personal side of making sure that your stakeholders or that you're meeting your stakeholders' needs.
And I'd also suggest, I had a great mentor who taught me this. Sometimes when there is a downturn or resources are spread thin, it's easy to stay very focused on what's important to me. And so if I'm an oil and gas company, to say I need the community's audience, or the community thinks I need the attention of the oil and gas company to tell them about my concern. And I think, and sometimes we say it's a waste of time to listen to the concerns or the needs or the perspective of that other group. And in light of the time that I have and the pressures I'm under, but we can't just go to another party when it's something I want. We need to be prepared to spend the time when it's something that they're interested in, and taking the time to listen carefully to what they're interested in as well.
Okay, thanks, Dichi. It sounds like there are some opportunities now in this time then where there may be more time and space available to build some relationships and to have those, to establish and maintain those personal connections. So I want to turn it over to the group here. Are there questions that you have for the panel today? I've got Jessica with the mic. I've got a question over here. Thank you.
Hi. I'd just like to hear from each of your perspectives, whose job do you think public engagement is inside of a company?
Go ahead, Darcy.
Everyone's. I think it's incumbent upon each and every employee within an organization and each and every staff member within government and the regulatory side of things to be that ambassador, to steward and to initiate and to do the very best they can, you know, in that regard to make sure that they're doing their part in stakeholder engagement. It's not just one role that one person needs to fill or can fill.
I comment on this. I feel like Alice is asking me this directly. I think I learned very quickly as a development manager that if I wanted to get a better perspective of how to go about building something, I needed to go out and meet with the stakeholders and the people that were building this thing in. And I learned that very quickly. And it was, I guess, affirmed to me through some really good research that a group called Design Thinking is doing down in California. I think it's at UCLA, I might have that wrong, but Design Thinking, just Google that. And this is a group of people that have worked on, and in fact, the principal in this was the individual that helped Steve Jobs create Apple. Apple, yeah,
yeah.
Got it right, yeah. At any rate, he's well known as a great innovator. And one of the key principles in that was that if you're going to design something or build something, you've got to go out and build some empathy around who you're building it for or where you're building it. And we can't sit in our ivory towers in Calgary and do that without going out and meeting with people face to face to understand their perspective. And so community engagement is indeed everybody's role, as a whole lot of people's role, but for sure, development managers, project managers, engineers do need to get out and visit with the community and find out the community's perspective on what they're doing. And I think we will build better projects, more responsible projects, and more innovative projects.
Thanks, Glenn.
I guess I'm going to just say, from a being in part of the public and not part of a company, that I think when we sit at the A&W coffee shop, I heard that earlier, when we're sitting there pounding our tables and everything else, that we should take it upon ourselves to not just band together, but we should be the one that's sitting in the corner that's, you know, has his axe to grind, is like, listen, you need to come and say your voice. You just can't sit in the corner and beat the drum or beat your fist on the table. You have to become involved. And we have to engage them. If I know myself, it's like I hear somebody at the coffee shop complain about taxes. I said, well, that's fine. We all complain about taxes. But guess what? Nobody's shooting me, and we have no internal warfare that, you know, so there's other positives. But if this is how you feel, go talk to somebody. You need to be a part of it. I don't feel it's up to the oil companies, for example, to always be the ones trying to engage. I appreciate the endeavor and the energy that they put into it. I really do. But it's also the fact that we have to take it upon ourselves to be open to that engagement as well.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
say one more thing that was an aha moment for me, and I have had the chance to spend a lot of time in southern Alberta and look at windmills. Now, windmills are a very trivial example, but it spoke to me about the importance of seeing different perspectives to be able to properly deal with an issue. I don't know how many of you have asked, but which way does a windmill turn? Well, it depends on which way you're looking at it. In Alberta, if you're looking east, it's going clockwise. If you look west, it's going counterclockwise. And it's a very trivial example, but there's no sense of those two people arguing about which way the turbine is turning. They're both right. And if we don't meet face to face or stand together and understand each other's perspectives, we're going to be arguing about the wrong things. And we're not going to be making our communities better, and we're not going to be building relationships. And so that, think about that. Ask somebody sometime in a room and have an argument about which way a windmill turns.
Thanks, Glenn. Eric, did you want to add anything, or no? Not that. Thank you. Any other questions from the floor here? Or if there's questions of our panel members have of each other too, I did tell them that they're welcome to ask questions of each other if they want to. We've got one over here. Thanks.
Question about the gravel and your example. Is your group dealt with and got cooperation of the development company who was assigned to take the gravel out of the ground? But my question is around the owner of the gravel, the farmer, rancher who actually owned the resource. What was his learnings? Or how did your synergy group deal with his attitude toward dealing with his neighbors rather than lay that on the gravel development company?
Very good question. Initially, it was a rezoning that the development company was coming in to do. And it did not get rezoned because of the fact that in our county, there is a certain percentage of, I want to say the dirt map, if it agriculture dirt map, right? So if it reaches a certain percentage, they're not going to allow, any other development on it other than agriculture. So that got turned down. So then the landowner very quietly went to the developer and said, I'll sell you the property. So with the amount of money that the developer paid for the property, which was in the millions, there was no relationship with the landowner after that with the rest of the community, unfortunately. But the developer in itself, they went through the means, they did 2 open houses, they sat at the table with us. The problem was their, they did hydrology reports, they did, and that kind of thing. They weren't current. They were like 3 years old, and that was part of our appeal process was you need to bring these current, you need to, and then once everybody was satisfied with what the developer had done and basically heeded to our, please go Monday to Friday, 7, watch for the school bus, et cetera, it was fine. I mean, I have their cards on my fridge. I can call them anytime and they pick up the phone directly. So it's still open, and believe it or not, the development hasn't started yet. But once it starts, they're giving everybody months notice, not weeks notice, which is awesome.
Okay, thank you. We take one more question if there is one.
I just
Oh,
to
go,
touch
sorry,
on
Eric.
what Glenn,
Yeah.
I thought of something.
This one over here.
Now, something that Glenn mentioned that just slipped by. He said that engagement leads to better, more economical, more efficient or effective projects, both for the community and for the company. And it's a pretty interesting statement, actually, in creating a business case for public engagement and a value for being involved. And in thinking about why that is, I think that public engagement moves the participants away from assumption and toward fact and understanding with one another. And that public engagement also, and again, this is coined not by me, but I think this is really valuable in a room like this. Public engagement closes the gap between regulation and community expectation. Regulation can't be the whole and isn't able to be the whole answer, and each community is different, each project is different, and quality public engagement closes that gap that often is there just with only regulation and what the community expects, whether it's a gravel pit or oil and gas project.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I think we'll take one more question here, and then we'll close. Go ahead, Marlo.
I heard the comment earlier from the panel that there are amongst us the people who wish to engage. Can the panel comment on the people, how we could encourage the people who don't engage in this process and how we can improve that process down the road, their thought on that?
I'm going to just say that there are people that in our synergy group that just, in regards to what our little community group, I should say, that didn't want to come to the table. But they came to the initial table and they said, we just want to hear the initial facts and we don't want, like, you can give us a letter or a phone call later. We're not going to be participating in the active meetings and whatever else. And I appreciate that because they were elderly and they just wanted to know the bare facts, and they said, if you need us anymore, just give us a call. So they left it an open door. But I also feel as a newcomer in any kind of a community that you need to invite and you need to say, I'll pick you up, I'll bring you, I'll come for coffee. You have to continue to repeat that invitation. Because sooner or later, they're going to go, thank you for your persistence, because this was important to me. I didn't realize it. You recognized it. And for me, that's don't stop. I mean, it's a persistence thing.
I'll just comment. I think that a lot of us are married and live in families, and we know that I've certainly learned that I can't make my wife do anything, and I can't make my children actually do anything. I can only influence them. And I influence them through my relationship, I influence them through my values, I influence them through what I do. And one of the things I've learned as a company is that we often say a lot of things, but it's so important that we actually do what we said we would do. And I think with those people that are struggling with wanting to engage or don't want to engage, I think it's persistence in focusing on the relationship, not focusing on a box to tick that I've got to get to meet that person. It's about continuously, and as you say, inviting them, continuously encouraging them, and not giving up on them. And I know in the company I worked for, there are relationships that were very sour that have turned a corner 20 years later. And it took the efforts of local people continuously connecting, not being afraid to say hello to the person in the coffee shop. But it also was so important that we continued to do what we said we were going to do to demonstrate that they could actually trust us. And we all know that any relationship, once trust is broken, it's a long journey back. And I think that's a key to all of this.
Go ahead, Eric, and then Darcy.
I was going to say, agree totally. I think we need to look at this on a long-term view. Public engagement that has lasting results. We got to see it over the long term, and just a quick. I just mentioned this example to somebody here this week. In a very challenging situation where there was real health concerns, both human health, animal health, land degradation concerns that a particular person had over a fairly large project. These these residents and landowners, there was persistent and consistent and purposeful reaching out to interact. And did a lot of the problems get solved? Was there still concern ongoing about health issues, animal health issues? Yes. But after over a number of years, when a person who was person who had been involved in that engagement over the long period with this resident from a company was sick and in the hospital, among the first people there with a card and some knitting for the grandkids were those residents with whom they've been building this relationship over the years. And all of a sudden, an aha moment goes, there's something, as we heard this morning from David, there's something bigger going on here than just getting a project done or resolving a particular issue.
Darcy, do you want the last word?
Last word? Ooh, goodness. Better be insightful. I think there's a little bit more to the if you build it, they will come. I think everybody naturally wants to be associated with or migrate towards a good thing. And I think synergy groups in many occasions fail to celebrate their successes amongst themselves. And they also, I think, could do a better job in communicating those successes to the broader community, to the broader public, to to your friends and neighbors. Synergy groups are, in my view, at times the best kept secret that there is. Right? I think that I guess if you celebrate your successes, if you communicate those successes, more people will want to be a part of it.
Well, I do want to thank our panel members, and I know I've written down some nuggets that I'll be taking away with me, some of the things I heard. Engagement closes the gap between regulation and community expectations. Thanks, Eric. And Glenn talking about we waste a lot of time arguing about the wrong things. And from Michelle, keep repeating the invitation to engage, being persistent with that, being in it for the long term. And Darcy, you just noted too, people want to migrate to a good thing. Synergy may be one of the best kept secrets out there. And on a personal level, I also want to remember something Darcy said about you look a lot smarter when you're not talking. So thanks to your grandfather for that one. So join me in thanking the panel members today.